Hi everyone. In the previous section, we already looked at the first essential element of a valid contract, which is agreement. Now we then look at the second element of a valid contract, which is consideration. So what considerations means? Consideration means something of a legal value given in exchange for a promise. So what could be given at consideration of a contract? The more important things is that the things that are given in exchange for a promise must have a legal value. The legal values here means something that the law recognizes. We will look at the legal values in more details in the next slide. But at an essential element of valid contract, you should know that the contracts which are not supported by consideration are generally not enforceable. Of course, there are some exceptions. We will look at exceptions later on. So what are the elements of consideration? In order to be legally effective, consideration must have two elements. The first element is that considerations is something of legal value. And the second one is that that value must be a bargain for exchange. So we will look at what legal value means and what bargains for exchange mean in the next slide. Now, I want now to talk about legal value. A contract is considered supported by legal value if the promisee suffers a legal detriment or the promisor receives a legal benefit. So what legal detriment means? So before I talk about legal detriment, we talk about detriment. According to a legal dictionary, detriment means any loss or harm to a person or property, or the relinquishment of a legal right, benefit, or something of value. So, detriment is more frequently applied to contract formation since it is an essential element of considerations with a prerequisite of a legal enforceable contract. To incur detriment means to cement a promise by either refraining from doing something that one have a legal right to do, or by doing something that one is not under any obligation to do. So here is an example of legal detriment. If the law of a country prohibits a person from smoking until that person reaches the age of 18. If you already reached the age of 18, for instance, you 19 years old already, you promised to your father that you will not smoke until you turn 21. So in that case, you prevent yourself from smoking, even though the law doesn't prohibit you from smoking when you already reach the age of 18. Legal values can be the promisor receives a legal benefit. It's happened very commonly involving tangible assets. For example, payment of a sum of money or the transfer of a property. That can be an example of legal benefit. Or the performance of an act in case you provide a service. So, for example, if I want to buy the iPhones, I pay a sum of money in order to get the phone. So what legal benefit that I have is the phone. And the seller of the phone will get the money from me, so that he hit legal benefit from the transaction. So legal benefit means the benefit that the law recognizes. So legal value overall means the value that the law recognizes. It can be the legal detriment or the legal benefit. And legal detriment means the detriment that the law recognizes, which means that you are doing something that the law do not require you to do, or you prevent yourself from doing something that the law allows you to do. Legal benefit means the benefit that the law recognizes is a legal value. For example, a sum of money, a property. Okay, of course, the property that the law allows people to possess. Or it can be doing something, performing of something that could valuable to another person.
So now we move on to look at the other aspect of consideration, which is bargain for exchange. So what is the bargain for exchange? The bargain for exchange is a process of bargaining or inducement that leads to an enforceable contract. So you should remember that consideration is not necessary to be adequate. It needs to be sufficient. So I can give you an example of bargain for exchange. So you are going to buy a house. So even though the market price of the house is 3 billion Vietnamese đồng, for instance, but the seller is very much in need of cash, and he wants to sell the house as soon as he can, and he then can reduce the price of the house under the market value. For example, he offered to sell his house at the price of 2 billion instead of 3 billion at a market price. And you then agree to buy the house at 2 billion. But later on, he recovered from financial difficulties, and he looked back at that contract, and he think, okay, he sold the house below the market value. He want to claim the house back because he said it is not fair. But the law doesn't interfere in that case because there is already consideration for the house. You give him 2 billion, even though the 2 billion is below the market price of the house at that time. But it doesn't matter. The law doesn't require that considerations must be fair, must be adequate. However, if there is a grossly unfair consideration, and the court may look at the other aspect of the consideration to see whether there is any defense to enforceable of the contract, such as whether the contract lack of genuine consent of the party. But that is the different things that we will look at later on the third chapter. And the bargain for exchange at the second aspect of the consideration element is presented in most commercial transactions. In almost every commercial transaction, the parties are bargaining about the value to be exchanged. How about gift promises? Gift promises means that someone promised to give something to another person without anything in return. For example, I am going to buy new iPhones, and my friend knows that. He told me that if you buy the new one, please give your current one to me. And I promised to her that, yes, sure, when I buy a new one, I will give it to you. Several days later, I buy a new iPhone. But my son, when he see me to have a new iPhone, and he asked me to give the old one to him, and I then gave it to him. Several days later, my friend see me with the new iPhone, and she asked me, "Where is your old iPhone? Please give it to me as promised." I then say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gave it to my son already." So can she sue me in the law court for the iPhone? What is the answer? The answer is no. The reason is that because there is no enforceable contract between her and me, right? Because there is no valid consideration. This is a promise that I give the phone to her, but without anything in return. And it is that a gratuitous promises. And according to US law, gratuitous promises are unenforceable because it's lack of consideration. So the general principle, the general rule is that if the contract lack of consideration, it cannot be a valid contract and it can't be enforceable. However, there are some exceptions. What are the exceptions? The two main exceptions include the first one, complete gift promise not recoverable. What does it mean? If I promise to give my iPhones to my friend and I already gave it to her, so when I came home, my son told me, "Oh, you have a new iPhone. Can you give it to me, your current one?" And I then now think again and want to change my mind. Tomorrow, I see my friend and ask her whether she can return the iPhone to me in order for me to give it to my son. But she didn't agree. She doesn't agree. So can I take her to the law court to claim back my iPhone? Because there is no valid contract, no enforceable contract between her and me. However, I cannot do that. Okay. The reason is that because the law say if the gratuitous promise already executed, already performed, already done, the law will not interfere. The second exception of the general rules on the gift promise is gift promise made in writing and witness can be enforceable. For instance, if your father promised you that he will give you a Vespa if he gain a business deal. So generally or in principle, if he just promised like that by words, verbal form, later on, even though he gained the business deal, but he refused to give the Vespa to you, you can't claim it because that is a gratuitous promise. There is no consideration from your side, so you can't ask the court to interfere to enforce his promise. However, if he make his promise in writing, he put that promise in a piece of paper, he signs that piece of paper, and that piece of paper was witnessed by your mother. And in that case, the gratuitous promise would be made in writing and witnessed by a third party can be enforceable by the law court. Okay, so there are two exceptions to the rule governing the gift promise. I just want to repeat here that generally the gift promises cannot be enforceable by the law code because it lack of consideration. However, there are some exceptions that the rules may not be applied.